I'm just going to frame out basically modern legal, banking, political, constitutional structure, and then we'll break for lunch over to Vivian's, and then we'll go into that. And ultimately, there's a purpose and a specific that I'm aiming it to, which is essentially back to the bottom line theme. The two pillars, the line of the king and the priest. The priest controls the law. So what we need to look at is the ultimate distillation or the ultimate conclusion of this sweep of history of law and the money system leading to the what we call the New World Order or the U.S. corporate statutory structure, because the bottom line is that we bind ourselves by bonding ourselves to this artificial construct called the Uniform Commercial Code and the monetary structure. And the monetary structure is a system of perpetual and ever-expanding debt that mathematically is impossible to pay back. Okay, so, again, when I said going back to the essence of it, people confuse, or not confuse necessarily, but misapply what we call greed. Oh, they just want more and more money. It has nothing to do with that. They print the money, they make the money, they control the money. Meyer Amstel Rothschild said, I don't care who makes the laws of a country, just give me control of the money. Why? Because he understood the nature of the template, of the pre-programmed endpoint, which is to get the people to voluntarily bind themselves by agreement, contract, and jurisdictional attachment. Remember, religion is religged to bind again. It's a secularized temple of legalism, law, and structure. They actually call the courts temples of justice. The priests wear black robes, right? Okay, so that we voluntarily rebind ourselves to the secularized system of religion by contract and adherence to jurisdiction. And what we will get into this afternoon is how that mechanism actually works, of what is essentially defined as being the surety binding or bonded to the guarantee of commercial paper under the Uniform Commercial Code of this perpetual debt enslavement. Okay, so anybody not know what that term surety, bonded surety means? Okay, yes, no, maybe? Well, I will. Not now, but this afternoon. But I just want to know. I will define it right. I will define it now. We'll expand it later. But this is the essence of it, and this is how I've seen as I've grown into my study. And once I started studying law and the history of law and the construction through history of arriving at where we're at today in law, that it all is essentially that whole thing. The king and the priest lift the people off the land, civilize them. Remember, civilize is to put you into the civitas, the public body, where you do not have substantive rights or unalienable rights. You have granted privileges, civil rights. And I'll get into that history either in the next half hour or later this afternoon, how that was constructed. But it's all about the king controls the land. The people are civilized and lifted into this containment field. They are bonded as a bonded surety. What is a bonded surety? It's simply collateral, okay? Because if you have a mortgage, an instrument, a commercial instrument attached to this building for an obligation of debt that you contractually agreed to, then the building is the collateral or the surety. Okay, a surety is someone who stands in for, if it's not a physical item of collateral or property, stands in for as a guarantor. So we have all been bonded as guarantors or surety against the national debt. And I'm going to go through the basic framework of how that's been constructed. I will do that basic framework in the next 25 minutes, and then we'll fill that in during and after lunch. So we have the Declaration of Independence occurring just weeks after the founding of the modern Illuminati. There are other things that happened in the 1700s. One key one is the founding of something in the year 1717 called the Royal Society that became the basis in the British structure of things, of the scientific model carried concurrently with the expansion through the colonialization of that British system. Okay, so because ultimately the British system is that force behind or in front of what lies behind the City of London and the Crown to civilize, monetize, and bind and bond the global population through the banking system. And so the Royal Society established that scientific model, and out of which emerged in the middle 1800s the Darwinian model, that hierarchical structure of the pyramid at the top of which is your alpha male dog, which is the corporate model, the political model, and so forth. Everything is based, all of our systems, the banking system, the judicial system, the IRS system, et cetera, it's based on several key models. One is that hierarchical pyramid structure. At the top are the elite few who get to control the pyramidal structure, which David Icke talks about a lot in his work. And the other is the initiatory levels modeled after the secret societies, the Masonic system of the degrees and so forth. At the bottom of the base is your ignorant masses, which includes the people such as your IRS agents and officers, your judicial judges and officers, et cetera, and all of these systems in media, judiciary, taxation, et cetera. You have the ignorant masses controlled by the trustees, like in the prison system. If you're a prisoner but you do things that the warden likes, you get made the trustee. You're a prisoner, but you get a few extra bennies to lord over the rest of the prisoners, right? It's no different in, if you've entangled yourself in any way with our so-called judicial system, you notice that they're as ignorant of true law. When we start implementing or applying true law, it's designed for them to be ignorant. Only when you go higher up do you get real law, where you can potentially get some level of, justice or binding, or remedy. That's becoming less and less so as we go up, because basically my perception of it is we're standing in the law, and we have to stand in the law, which is based on whatever you want to call them. Some people like to call them Christian principles. I like to call them universal principles, but balance, balance and equality, justice, things of that nature. And the system was designed that they expected us to remain ignorant. We have become more and more intelligent and educated in law, and so we're forcing them to become more outlawish, outlandish, and more, illegal within their own system. Okay, but we will get to that. What I see that is basically forcing them to come out of the closet to show how truly corrupt and illegal that they are. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. But that does bring up a key point I want to make, which is that as I've studied the history of law and the evolution of law, there are two concurrent paths. There are the laying down of laws, acts, principles that are in conformity or alignment, in my perception, with what I would consider true law, balanced principles. That is continually, if you study the American law system, that's continually there. These are the laws that we who study law and apply it are going to and saying, here, it's in our own founding documents, our own founding acts, statutes at large at the federal level, and so forth. Concurrent with that is the corruption, this continual turning upside down, inside out, and ass backwards of legalisms based on statutes, corporate structure, and all the rest of it that has become what has been designed to be that which binds us to this system of perpetual debt enslavement. So keep that in mind, two parallel paths. So in 1776, we have the Declaration of Independence. We have the Revolutionary War, 1783, the signing of the Treaty of Peace to end the war. That Treaty of Peace in 1783 was signed in the name of George III, who in the opening paragraphs is described as the King of England, the King of France, and the Prince of the United States. How do you like that? So we signed a treaty to end the Revolutionary War, acknowledging that George was still the Prince Elector of the United States. So what is and was and still is the United States? Well, let's go back to the City of London. Let's go back to the early 1600s. Certain things happened. Remember, we have the Dutch, the Netherlands, the House of Orange that came out in later in the 1600s to found the Bank of England. And we have the Rothschilds emerging. We have the City of London and the corporation. What emerged out of the corporation are primary charters that end up extending the commercial interest. Remember I said the three levels of law and the three city-state sovereign entities of Vatican, City of London, D.C. are canon law, kingdom law, and commercial law, which lock us and bind us on those three main bodies, the physical, the emotional, the mental. So what emerged out of the corporation of the City of London were primary charters, one called the British East Indies Company, and then there was also the Dutch East Indies Company. Between the two of them, all of this vast area was basically commercially conquered, you know, and you've got everything from the taking over of India, then the production of opium and the infiltration of opium into China, and then the opium wars. You know, anybody want to guess or state if they know who the biggest drug dealer on the planet is?
China.
No, the City of London. Okay. Okay. How did they build that empire? They built it on opium. You know, the clipper ships. Yeah, they were bringing out spices and silks and everything else, but one of their primary things was opium, okay? Because that was a standard plank of policy to infiltrate the society and, basically begin to undermine it through social addiction and drugs. So opium then became refined opiates in the late 1800s, and then we have heroines and morphines and everything else. Now we have Pfizer and Merck, who are your post-Nazi Germany drug dealers, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And and then the cocaine industry and all the rest of it. These are elements of policy that have existed for 200 plus years. So that too, we're getting ahead of ourselves. But the key back to that Treaty of Peace is the United States was, I put away my, one more thing I have to draw on the whiteboard. Okay, anybody want to tell me what this is? Hey, shut up over there. Whose flag is that? It's the flag of the British East Indies Company. Okay? Do a Google search, flag, British East Indies Company, and you will see that flag.
I thought Martha did that.
Yeah, Martha. She may have, and if she did, she worked for the British East Indies Company. So there's something, not quite pure and unadulterated about some of the elements that we've been taught in history, because this flag was actually adopted in 1777. I read that recently. I thought it was adopted in 1787 with the Constitution, but it was actually adopted right after the Declaration of Independence. So we have the Declaration of Independence establishing the free and independent states, which then became new states. But the colonial charters, which were corporate charters issued by and locked into agreement by all contracting parties with the City of London, by and through its commercial instrumentality, the British East Indies Company, remained intact. So when the Constitution was issued in 1787, or put forth to be accepted as a contract between the free and independent states, the United States was already established and in place and recognized by the Treaty of Peace in 1783 as per belonging to the Prince of the United States, George III, okay, who in turn was basically operating for the principal, which was the City of London, which maintained the crown for its owner, as I described yesterday, which is the Vatican and the Pope. See, they agree. And as I described, the exchequer is the chancellor of the exchequery who maintains the treasury by and through its agents from the temple bar and the inns of court, which are the bar attorneys, as I described yesterday. Okay? So anyone who accepts a bar card, a title of nobility called esquire, is a foreign agent. Okay? So what you have to understand about the structure of the United States of America and the United States is there's two distinct entities. There's the United States, which is foreign to the sovereign states or the state republics, which are together called the United States of America. The free and independent states established by and not rebutted by any contracting party or otherwise by the Declaration of Independence. So it's very important to read the Declaration over and over again. That's the basis of our authority and capacity to re-inhabit the Republic as we have been doing, which we can talk about later if you're interested in. But when the Constitution was established, there's a whole talk that I gave that Jason filmed and he put on the California Republic website, the website being republicforcalifornia.org. If you want to look at that, it's right on the front. It's about, 45 minutes, I think, something like that. And I go into this in more detail. I'm just going to touch on it. You can watch that in fuller detail. But the bottom line is that part of the root of the word constitution is a word constitutor. Constitutor is defined in law as he or it, he as an entity, or it can be an individual. He who takes upon himself the obligation, the burden of an obligation formally adhered to another party. Translated, that if Jason has a debt that he owes to Paul, and for whatever reason I agree to take the obligation of that debt, now I am obligated to Paul for that debt, I become the constitutor. So the United States became the constitutor by the Constitution. Article 6 of the Constitution says, henceforward, or one portion of it, henceforward all debts and engagements previously valid against the Confederation shall henceforward be valid against the United States. So the United States as a foreign body, which had to be put in place to integrate a national presence or relationship under the law of nations with other nations, but also for multiple purposes, which we will get into, did establish and recognize the sovereign republic nature of the 13 original states, but at the same time attached debts and obligations and engagements to the United States, a foreign entity foreign to the sovereign republics. Okay? If you read the preamble of the Constitution, it says it establishes two parties. It says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union and all the rest of the elements, do hereby establish and ordain this Constitution for the United States of America. You know, distinctly identifying two parties. So it's a contract. Part of that contract was the debt that the free and independent 13 states took upon themselves during the Revolutionary War to fight it and establish the Confederation, handed that debt over to the Constitutor, the United States, so that they could start life whole as free and independent sovereign republics without debt. The debt was given to the United States, but that's part of the pre-programmed plan, because later on we collectively, they as we as they, are going to expand that debt and bind the states and the people to that debt as a perpetual expanding debt enslavement system. Okay?
Is that when they came up with the straw man thing?
Well, that's later on, and we'll get into that this afternoon. And again, we're only framing it out. We don't have time to go into all the detail, but this is to frame out and come back to our ultimate tying in the basic theme of the two pillars and the king and the priest and all of that. So that's what was established in 1787 and accepted as a contract between the United States of America and the United States. So the rest of that detail you can watch in that video that's on the republicforcalifornia.org, and it's very interesting how it evolved. The key is, what's our time now? Actually, I have the clock here. 11:52. Okay.
Jane, you may want to clarify what you mean by United States at that point. Would it be corporation?
Well, I'm basically talking about the federal government or entity established to be limited to a specific area of jurisdiction. Now, Article 1 lays out the legislature and Congress and says what the powers of Congress are. Okay? They're very specific and very proper powers that were delegated to Congress to coin gold and silver as lawful money, to establish standard weight and measure, you know, biblical principles of proper law to establish balance in a coinage and monetary system. And, you know, the ability to declare war, etc. There's 17 powers laid out in Article 1 for Congress. And specifically, all that Congress is allowed to do is apply those powers to its jurisdiction, which at the time is simply the 10 square mile area, you know, the Virgin Mary element, you know, which is going to be overlaid. But the ultimate goal, see, you see the future in the laying out of the template in the beginning. Because the point is that what they're going to do is turn that very limited jurisdiction, the territory, you know, of that 10 square mile, and any territory properly acquired by the United States, or land properly ceded by one of the states to the United States. You know, all these federal buildings and everything that's out there that's federalized, the Bureau of Land Management, Department of Interior, none of it has been properly ceded lawfully to the United States. And that's, you know, what we're basically attempting to turn back with the establishment, re-inhabiting of the Republic. Forts, arsenals, magazines, etc. Those are the proper authorities and territories of the United States. So that's 1787, 89, 1791. 1791, the first bank of the United States, a federal bank, a first attempt to create a central bank is instituted. You know, right away, we're sovereign, we're a republic, and boom, the bankers coming in, you know. Alexander Hamilton was Secretary of the Treasury, and he was decidedly and absolutely an agent of the Rothschilds and the banking powers, you know. So it's sort of a split reality, schizophrenic, you know. He was a founding father, but he was an agent of the banks, you know, laying the foundation for the things to come. So that bank stayed in place for 20 years. And then when Thomas Jefferson was president by 1811, he had enough of a quorum in Congress to prevent the renewal of that charter, which is why the War of 1812 started. There were two primary reasons for the War of 1812. To force the United States back to create another bank, which was created in 1816, the Second Bank of the United States. When the first Bank of the United States was decommissioned in 1811, it was converted to something called City National Bank, which eventually became Citibank, which is now Citigroup, which has that logo I showed you yesterday. It's a Rothschild bank, okay? Basically, Citibank is Rothschild, Chase Bank is Rockefeller, Bank of America is CIA and Vatican. You know.
What was the second reason, Ken?
Pardon?
What was the second reason?
The second reason is in the late 1800s, 1809, thereabouts, the original 13th Amendment was passed that prohibited anybody who accepted titles of nobility from a foreign power to hold public office. And that includes esquire. So any bar attorney who's taking on the title of esquire from the Temple Bar and the Chancellor of the Exchequer would be forbidden from taking office. Well, that obviously would not be allowed to hold. And so the states did ratify it, and all the records of that ratification process were in the White House. If you remember from history, the White House was burned in 1814. Okay, why was it burned? Because they burned the records, or as much as they could, but there was still enough of it that survived history that numerous individuals have been able to research and bring forward today. And so then the Second Bank of the United States was established in 1816, which Andrew Jackson then was able to defeat in 1836. So it wasn't renewed. The next time they got a central bank and were able to make it stay was 1913, called the Federal Reserve. So the key that I'll wrap up this period, and then we have to break down, is that, you know, fast forward into the 1850s, the 1860s, setting up for the Civil War. One of the key things that happened just before the Civil War is that the integrated presence of the British East Indies Company, maintaining the interest of the Crown through that contract that's honoring previous debts and engagements. Remember, the constitutor of the United States that took on the debt accrued during the Revolutionary War, who was the primary creditor? France. France lent a lot of money to the states for the Revolutionary War. Who was George III identified as in the Treaty of Peace? King of England and the King of France and the Prince of the United States. So he's the creditor, and then he's going to become the constitutor through the British East Indies Company to be the creditor and hold it against the debtor really himself through his multiple facets, his multiple agents. So in the late 1850s, 57, 58, the British East Indies Company, maintaining the interest of the Crown, divided itself, okay, into North and South, into two elements. One is the Virginia Land Company, which is located in this place called Langley, Virginia, okay, where eventually we have the CIA, which is nothing more than His Majesty or Her Majesty's Secret Service, which was established in the early 1600s. Okay, and everything, James Bond. Why is he called Bond? Because he's a bonded servant of the crown, maintaining His Majesty's Secret Service. Why is the Secret Service in the United States under the Department or the United States Treasury? Okay, the Secret Service to maintain the bond. Why does the Secret Service? Did you know the Secret Service is part of the Treasury?
No, I didn't.
Okay, why is the Secret Service assigned to protect the president? Because he's the CEO of the corporation under which all of the bonding, the surety bonding against all of the chattel property. Do you know what chattel property is? It's movable property. Okay, in biblical terms, the woman is chattel property of the father until he hands it off to the husband. Okay, ostensibly the men are not supposed to be chattel property, but we've all been converted into chattel property, And etymologically, that word chattel is similar to the word cattle, okay? And how do we denominate cattle? Heads of cattle, okay? Capita, per capita, right? Which makes capital, okay? We are cattle property counted in census to be capital, to be monetized and pledged as chattel property to underwrite as surety, as bonded collateral to the perpetual debt machine. See how it all fits together? Are you happy about it?
No.
So His Majesty's, the Crown Secret Service became an extension of, and as the British East Indies Company expanded out into all these areas during the 1600s to 1700s, you can be well assured that the Secret Service, His Majesty's Secret Service, was on all of those boats, establishing, the intelligence network. So is it an accident, coincidence, or by design that the British East Indies Company established its southern component in Langley, Virginia, as the Virginia Land Company? No, it's not. That eventually became also the home of the CIA, which now the CIA's headquarters building is named after our friend George Bush Sr., who we will get into later today. No, maybe we don't want to get into him, but we will discuss him. And then the northern component was the Hudson Bay Company, established with its headquarters in New York City. What do we have there? Anybody want to take a guess at it? The two pillars, okay? The pillar of the king in Virginia Land Company to hold the land for the benefit of the crown, which is owned by the Vatican. And then the pillar of the priest to establish the law. How is the law established? Because New York City is the Empire State, the reinstitution of Roman civil code to civilize or codify through the Uniform Commercial Code and other uniform acts to bring the people into the public as the civilized body containment field to herd the cattle, to be capitalized, to be the bonded surety, to create the monetized debt system that we call money, which is nothing more than a lunar cult, remember? Juno Moneta. So law will be established by the law of the priest in New York City, which is the home of what? The Federal Reserve, okay? So when we combine the Federal Reserve note and the Social Security system, which is insurance that bonds and underwrites us to the monetized debt system, and then we bring the third component of the Uniform Commercial Code, that's your convergence of creating the law of the priest. And we'll go into it this afternoon, how the administrative structure after the bankruptcy of the United States in 1933 manages and maintains all of that. So that's the end of our morning session. Thanks you all, and we're done.